Hello, Facebook. Let's see if we get a couple people on real quick. Get some people to join us. Got a great guest today. Again, NBC 15. We are doing our part here to help target the violence in our community. We all know that gun violence has increased drastically among our youth just in the past few years. It's like every day we're reporting on something that's happening. We've got murders. We have so many violent crimes, carjackings. Just this week, 7 teenagers in 2 days were arrested for carjackings. So we're here trying to find solutions to get these kids off the streets, to help kind of turn their energy to something that's positive and not negative, and provide a lot of information for you parents out there. So make sure you're tagging your kids, tag parents, tag your friends, anyone who needs some help with their children. And today's topic is really good. We're talking about science. We're talking about music. It's basically STEAM. Yes, STEAM. Science, technology, engineering, arts, and math. And joining me now is Dr. Raul Richardson, who is I'm going to say, you're like my father. Y'all are a rarity in the business. You're an African-American scientist.
Correct.
Which when you started, there were none in the business.
Well, I'm going to defer to your dad, okay, because he's a very distinguished gentleman with a very, very, very stellar past, and I'm not going to say I'm necessarily in his genre necessarily, but yeah, there weren't necessarily a lot of people that were pursuing careers in this particular field early on. But I was surprised. I'd have to say, after I got past elementary school, I ran into quite a few people that had interest in the sciences. So,
which is amazing, because we have so many kids that they don't realize how much it can change their lives. And I'm going to twist my dad's leg one day and get him on here to talk to us. But it changed his life. It brought him from out of the projects of Atlantic City, New Jersey, to a whole different environment, opened up a better life. It created a better life for us as children, because he was already where he was before we came along.
Well, and for me, I think that the importance of science was, it wasn't subject to a lot of the, I don't know the way to say it, but kind of a subjectional kind of review process. 2 + 2 = 4. No one's going to say, well, I don't like your personality, I don't like your delivery, I don't like your tone. If you can arrive at the answer, then you are sure of getting an A. A lot of other subjects, could be subject to interpretation, whether it was literature, English, even in some cases history, as we now know, relative to the CRT conversations. So with sciences, it's always a situation where you're pursuing what is the truth. And in that pursuit of the truth, you use careful observation with a persistent search for truth to arrive at an understanding about what you're dealing with. And then you revise it over time.
And we're having a deep conversation here about science that maybe a lot of people. But let's talk about what you're doing here now to kind of help our youth, because we know there's a lot of violence in our community. And you're VP of Bayheth, I'm trying to get it right, okay. Research and Development Laboratories.
That's right.
And you do some programs to try to draw these kids in and get them interested in the science field and show them a different way of life.
Certainly. Well, and credit really has to go to Dr. Bayheth. It's Bayheth Scientific Research Institute is the educational nonprofit, and Bayheth Research and Development Laboratories is a privately owned laboratory on the campus of the University of South Alabama. And typically what we do is we bring young people in as young as 5 years old, and we engage them in fun scientific experiments, and we talk to them about a lot of things that have to do with the sciences, and we make them kind of a kid-friendly, almost, I guess it's like the Bill Nye, the science guy kind of a projects, 1 year we made them ice cream, 1 year we gave them all gifts to take home with them. Actually, one of the most fun things that we did was we had my dear friend Chandra Scott brought her daughter, and her daughter had heard about the lab and had gone with us on a couple of science projects down the Dauphin Island Parkway and down to Dauphin Island itself. And she wanted to come and see and work in the lab. And she just was inquisitive by nature, and she ended up doing a study on bees. But when she was turning 10 years old, her mother said, we're going to have a birthday party for you. And her mother asked them if we could have the birthday party at the lab. So we converted the lab into a kid-friendly environment. They put their hand on a tablet, like to get access to the lab. They all had lab coats and protective eyewear, PPE. And we had all kinds of test tubes set up with candy and drinks that were in test tubes and beakers. And we had hazardous waste materials that were actual hazardous waste materials, of course. And we gave all the young people a gift to take home with them. We made them, you remember the lava lamps?
Yes.
Well, we made them a lava lamp. And you're going to check this out. We took food coloring, water with some oil in a bell jar, and we dropped an effervescent tablet like an Alka-Seltz in it. And as the bubbles began to populate, it would float up to the top in different colors. And when the gas dissipated from the bubbles, it would fall back down.
Oh, wow.
So it was a very safe kind of product that any young person could touch and handle and not be concerned about it.
And so many people stay away from science, the kids, because they really don't like the class, but you found ways to make it fun. Now, my daughter actually came to your lab one time, and she came home with bath soaps and all types of great stuff, which actually engaged her into science. Now she's got all types of, her plan is to major in biology when she goes to college.
Well, I'm grateful that we were able to inspire her, but she was a pretty, she was a hot shot when she came in. She had an idea about what she wanted to do relative to cosmetology, and she had some thoughts about what kind of products would be beneficial for her particular market segment. And so all we really did was kind of just let her loose, and just say what things merge, what things don't merge, and a little periodic table kind of thing so she could see what those elements might be. But she was a fully formed and developed scientist when she first arrived to us, even at that young age.
She's a smart girl. I have to say, I haven't take credit for it. But as kids are young, and that's what we're talking about, finding things for them to do, because we have to even engage our younger children. And you said kids as young as 5. So how would people get a hold of you or people who want to mentor kids to bring them in to show them? Because there's so many scholarships out there, especially for African American children who go into the STEM field.
Well, before we get to that, the first thing I would say is, one, it's always helpful to have engaged parents, grandparents even for that matter. But at the end of the day, the reality is that most children think that they're not going to be good at science or they're not going to be good at mathematics. And that's largely because they haven't really been maybe engaged in appropriate fashion to make sure that it's something that's accessible to them and that it's inclusive for them. And what we really try to do is to take the mystery off of it. And that's why we always talk about STEAM, science, technology, engineering, arts, and mathematics, because we realize there's a real significant connection between how we learn about science and how we learn about math. Because if you think about it, math is just a language. Equal signs, division signs, minus signs are all part of the language, but no one ever really breaks it down like that to teach it to them. And we know that from an international community standpoint, as a global citizen, that any scientist that I talk to, whether it's in Russia, or China, Japan, wherever it may be, we may not speak the same language, but mathematics is the language of science. And so we kind of demystify and take some of the edge off and help them to understand that they can do it and maybe get them to speak the language, and that helps. But in terms of getting in touch with us, just Beheth Research and Development Laboratories, or you can visit me on Facebook, Raul Richardson, Dr. Raul Richardson, and I've got a link to the Beheth Scientific Research Institute on my Facebook page.
Now, you mentioned something about engaging the kids, and we're going to have to go back there because you have to engage the kids a lot, because we know we have a lot of low math scores and science scores for kids. I mean, what can you do to kind of engage them? I know you're not in the school system, so that kind of be like for a science teacher to answer that question. But if you have any suggestions on what to do, even us at home, on engaging our kids in science and math, and then reaching out to those kids in the community who really need that help with it.
Well, and you're right. I'm not necessarily actively engaged in the school system, but of course we've developed programs that we've worked with the school system through Title I federal programs and Title IV and the Boys and Girls Club, and obviously the Juvenile Center in terms of Judge Naaman's James T. Strickland Center. So we are involved with the kids in a lot of ways. But one of the things that I always say is we got to meet the kids where they are. So, for instance, as you remember, we did the Africatown Environmental Site Assessment Study. And that school that's located in the heart of Plateau is the Mobile County Training School. And one of the things that I've often said is those young people that live in that community, how much more beneficial would it be if we engaged them and brought to them and made come alive some of the environmental things that are surrounding them, whether it's Hog Bayou or the Mobile River, because there's a process we call a citizen scientist. And essentially what it does is it allows people in the community to identify the factors, like sentinels on the wall, so to speak, of things that they identify or observe in their community. So if you come into your community and you notice that there's a sheen on the water surface where you normally swim or fish, well, that's not the way it's supposed to be. And that indicates that maybe something's gotten into the water that may not be good for you. Or if you know that there's a factory down the street from your home and it usually has gray smoke coming out the plume, and for whatever reason now it's white, those are things that might pay attention to. Something even simpler than that. I'm a real big fan of driving down Dolphin Street and having the Oaks come over Government Street and things of that sort. When I moved here 23 years ago, there was an abundance of moss on the trees. Moss is one of the first indicators that something's changing in the environment in terms of the color, the context, the softness, the abundance of the moss. And if you're not seeing that on the trees, that means something's changing in the environment. People right now focus on the amount of bees that are in our environment. So I've been doing a lot of farming on our new home property. And I actually have introduced bee populations so they can better pollinate some of the crops that we have there. And, this particular case, Chandra's daughter, Leah, was curious about what was happening to the bees and what impact it would have on us as a community if, in fact, we couldn't get them to pollinate the fruits, the vegetables, and things that we eat. All of those things are connected. And I think if you can get young people to understand those connections, then all of a sudden they realize that this isn't just about textbooks and tests. This is about things that impact your life and the quality of that life.
Let's go to the arts then. You mentioned that you have arts in there. A lot of people hear about this
Yes.
or the STEM program. Outside of that, arts is not included, but arts is so important in developing children and also giving them a sense of belonging, because there's so many kids that fall through the cracks because they don't fit into that whole sports emphasis that's so much driven home all the time.
Yeah, and we found the arts provide a real important mechanism because, one, it allows young people to have a voice. And that voice can be the voice that they want to shape and that they want to, display to the environment, the community, the world for that matter. And what we also realize is that the same elements as it relates to rhythmic drumming or hip hop or rap, or even the measurements that occur in any kind of a music, from waltzes to jazz, which of course, jazz is my thing. It allows people the opportunity to make those connections and the discipline and structure to operate in those things. And then we particularly, as it relates to jazz, as we do with the Gulf Coast Ethnic and Heritage Jazz Festival, it allows for what's called improvisation. So essentially you have a song and the chords might be A, C, E. And then you play the rhythm and the melody accordingly. That's the structure. But when you come to the improvisational section, you might go C, A, E instead of A, C, E. And that allows independent creativity. And of course, all those opportunities for people to express themselves in a creative format also provides the opportunity for people to develop confidence in themselves. And when you develop the confidence and openness and allow people to have their own voice, suddenly they're much more engaging. And those things grow all the time. And let's understand, before you can be good, you got to be bad.
Yeah.
And before you can be bad, you got to really, really stink it up. But at some point or another, over a period of time, your confidence grows because your competence grows. And as those things grow together, then suddenly you're willing to take a step maybe in an area that you didn't want to take before.
You feel better about yourself, which
Absolutely.
is a problem that we have with a lot of our children in the community, is they don't feel good about themselves, and leads to all types of other problems, mental illness and just fights and everything else. And you've got a jazz camp actually that's coming up next week to try to, because we know that in music, kids get engaged in music, and we talk about the negative in music all the time, but this is something that's positive and it's great music for them.
Yes. And I'm so glad you shared that. And I want to kind of get back to the gun violence thing because you did lead out with that, and I do want to speak to that. But the thing that's really, Creola Ruffin, who's the local attorney, who's the founder of the Gulf Coast Ethnic and Heritage Jazz Festival, she came up with this idea of the Marcus Johnson Summer Jazz Camp, which of course was a local musician. And we had two of his sons in the camp in the early years because we wanted to provide an opportunity for young people to be able to grow and learn and explore and create their own voice within the context of their own music. And we've efforted, we talk about continuous improvement all the time, but continuous improvement is not necessarily a business concept solely. It's clearly a biblical concept. And the idea of how do we get better over time, and whatever the model is that we're striving after. And so it started from one day at the History Museum. Now it's a 2-week program. And the young people get excellent tutelage from remarkable people. This year, we're really focused on Hosea London, the iconic leader of the Excelsior Band. He's been like the dean of the class for a long period of time. And we're really fortunate because we have tremendous numbers of volunteers and family members. We have one family comes all the way from Hattiesburg to Mobile to be a part of this activity. And they practice and rehearse, and then they get a chance to perform on the big stage as a part of the concert series. So it really gives them a chance to increase their confidence, increase their knowledge. And as it relates to the Mobile County school system, a lot of the schools don't really start band services or programs until they get beyond middle school. So if you're a middle school student and you're in the 6th grade, you can't even be in the band until you're in the 7th grade. So we find a lot of young people coming to us in 5th grade, 6th grade, so they can get their chops together so they can be in the band in the 7th and 8th grade. And of course, when you get to high school, they got band camps and everything. Because the bands are big in high school as it relates to sports. So.
Oh, I know how that band goes. I remember those days. And you were talking about going back to gun violence. You were saying you're going to get back to there and how how everything works and helping these young kids out here?
Well, I'm not going to suggest that by any stretch of the imagination we're doing everything that can be done, or even to the best of our capacity, but certainly we're learning more and more each day. And the violence, of course, parenting is a big part of it. Of course, the community is a big part of it. But I think that the undeniable factor that influences so much of this is what the world says is about what our values are in terms of what we wear or what we eat or where we go or what we possess. And some of those images that are constructed by the world really are adverse to what we're trying to achieve in a community that's really ravaged by poverty. So if you don't have the money for food or the newest pair of Michael Jordans, or you're not wearing the right pair of jeans, or maybe, whatever the number of things are, those things really get at the heart of young people, particularly as we know so much of our worlds are being driven by social media. And so I think that in a part of that conversation has got to be relationships, the relationships between families and community, the relationships between local policing, and particularly as it relates to community policing. We can't have police officers that are only in their cars. We have to have them. We actually supported through the Mobile Law Enforcement Foundation the purchase of bicycles so that the police officers downtown wouldn't be in a car or on a mounted horse, but would ride their bicycles through the community. And as a result, they could have more interactions. When my children, and my children are grown now, but when my children were younger, there was a big conglomeration of young people that used to hang out at University Boulevard and Airport Boulevard, where Fusackley's is and the Smoothie King, and of course the big grocery store was there. And there were sometimes situations that created when those kids would be hanging out after hours. But as soon as we took the police officers that were stationed in that area out of their cars and had them walking amongst the young people, now it's not what did you do? Now it's Bobby, it's Ahmed, it's Sally, it's Susan, it's Barbara, it's people that you now have a relationship with. And your ability to relate to them within the context of whatever's going on, whether it's criminality, a fight, or anything like that, you can be more of a peacemaker if, in fact, you have a relationship where when you speak, people are used to hearing your voice. When they know that you look at them in the eye, they see a person, they see an individual with whom they can relate. Those are some of the concepts that are important to really establish to help that. And I think we're seeing some of that. The tremendous work the City of Mobile is doing with the Mobile Parks and Recreation Department, and some of the other things that I know the police departments are efforting to do in terms of their initiatives.
I have guests on before the past few weeks that have talked about the same thing, making a relationship, but even
Absolutely.
as us, just as regular people in the community, going out there and showing a lot of these kids that they are loved, not just one time, but going back continuously to actually let them know that people care and that they're there for them, and that we want to make a difference. We want to help them with their lives and what they're going through.
Sure. That's one of the mantras of the 100 Black Men of Greater Mobile is what they see is what they'll be. So if you can be visible in your community, if I don't care if you're a sheetrocker or a landscape artist, a lawyer or a police officer, to make yourself present, to make yourself a visible relationship with what those individuals can connect with, then they can begin to imagine things that might not have been part of their necessary lived experience. And those things are critically important.
And that's for somebody who wants to bring their children over to the lab. How often do you do something? I know at one time it was once a month.
Yes. We have, I typically do them as often as somebody contacts me to do them. I try to get at least a group of someplace between 8 and 12, maybe 15 people. Sometimes we'll do 2 a day. My friends down at the Dearborn Y, the one remaining YMCA we have in the community, they still contact me. And other people that are involved, some of my friends from the Strikers, Garrett Green and those guys, they contact me to bring young people up and, just reach out.
And this is easy to do. Okay, again, let's talk about the Jazz Camp. I think we've got information on that we can pull up on the screen about the Jazz Camp, when it is, where it is, what we need to do to sign up.
Well, I'm really excited about this. I mean, you can visit us at gcehjazzfest.org, which is our website, or you can visit us on Facebook in terms of social media, the Gulf Coast Ethnic and Heritage Jazz Festival. Or you can call directly to Creola Ruffin, the founder of this entire festival, and she can be reached at 251-478 4017.
Now, there is a fee, but there are scholarships for kids who cannot afford
Yes,
it.
that's
So we're
exactly
trying to help
right.
so many kids now.
And, when parents bring, if they choose to stay with their kids, they certainly can do that. We start usually about 10 a.m. in the morning. They get to about 9:30. We provide snacks for them, and we do the tutelage, and we break them into groups depending on what instrument they play. If you play a sax or you play a percussive instrument or things of that sort. And we even provide lunch for them. We take them on a fabulous trip every year. We take them to New Orleans to visit the jazz museums and things of that sort,
Nice.
radio stations. We actually took them to, oh man, I forget what that's called. It's the Jazz Village that, oh my gosh, I can't think of it right now. What's the jazz family out of Mobile that, oh my
Oh,
God.
you're asking me.
Yeah. Well, because we've been fortunate enough to have them on a couple of times. Marsalis family,
Okay.
right. So we had the Marsalis actually lead one of our events recently. The father wasn't able to come one time, but between Winston and the other brothers, they have an entire jazz village in New Orleans that the kids can go to and meet people and learn how music's created and even perform live.
All right, so what you're giving these kids, are you giving them an exposure?
Yes.
Let's talk about the importance of exposure, because a lot of these kids are committing some of these violent crimes. They're exposed to violence around them all the time, and to put them into a different environment.
Sure, and to expand their horizons. I mean, if you think all you know is the hood and you only know that one block, and then I show you that there's a museum of modern art, or I show you that there's a beautiful history museum downtown, maybe taking them out of their environment and then affording them an opportunity to be themselves within the context of a new environment is always helpful. And let's face it, the History Museum of Mobile downtown is an absolutely remarkable building to do that in. So we're grateful. And listen, before I forget, while we've been focusing on music, one of the other things that we've learned over time, because a few years ago, we had some people that wanted to be in a jazz camp, but they didn't play an instrument. And we do make an effort to find instruments for those young people that don't have their own. But this one young lady was so committed to being there, she said, well, I can sing. So we decided to add vocalists to the jazz camp experience. And so in that context, then we learned, as we were competing for another grant from the Alabama Contemporary Arts area, that the spoken word is such an important part. So these kids are all rapping all the time. But now if you imagine you can understand haiku and iambic pentameter and rhythm and pace and all those other things and oral interpretation, and then combine that with drums and music, that's right all in the space they currently occupy. So we'll do whatever we can to expose kids to instruments, music, education, and the opportunity to expand those horizons for them. We'll do that. We even did something at the museum, the Ben May Library. Carmen Brown came up with this idea, and it was kind of like as if you went to a zoo, but instead of seeing animals, you saw the instruments. And when Jose and his team from the Excelsior Band and E.B. Coleman Orchestra were there with their instruments, and they actually showed the students how the instruments worked, how they were crafted, the origins of it. And you'd be surprised. I mean, I learned a tremendous amount even then. So I can imagine how much excitement was in the minds of the young people.
And Mobile has such a rich history when it comes to music, especially when you have the bands during Mardi Gras. So there's no excuse for our kids not to have that type of exposure there.
I agree. And to tie into one of the things you said relative to the violence component is the mental health component. Okay? So we talk about relationships. I had a number of people on my online radio program, A New Day for You on Inspire You on Air, the new beat of the Bay. And it was a teacher from the Africatown community, a woman by the name of Miss Ruth Ballard. And she talked about how critically important it was for her as a young woman growing up in Mobile that her teachers would come and tell her parents or come and visit them at the home and, those kind of interactions. I know we don't see that much of it now, but there are some teachers out there in our community that are educators that have that kind of camaraderie, that kind of relationship with the students, that make those connections, that inspire, encourage, motivate, and maybe even sometimes correct, but they can do it within a context of love that allows that to grow and flourish. And so I'm grateful for all those things, but I'm also grateful for those people that realize they need help to not be afraid to ask for help. And if they ask for help, to know that they can receive it. But those things can only happen if, in fact, we establish a relationship that allows someone confidence and comfort in being able to confess or convey what's going on with me and get the kind of help that they need. So that is an important element of mental health that really needs to be focused on. And I've spent a lot of time focusing on traumatic, what they call adverse childhood experiences.
Yes.
Which we don't often realize that, you expect a child to come in off the street or off the school bus where they may have had a difficult time. Maybe they didn't have breakfast. Maybe there was some confusion at the household. Maybe there was an argument. And now they're emotionally disconnected and they're supposed to come into a classroom and sit down and not make a noise and be completely attentive. Sometimes we need to kind of address those things. I don't care what you do with it. If you want to make it a component of a meditation or you want to make it as just, starting the day off with some music to kind of calm some of the tumultuous experiences they had before they got there. But we've got to be aware that the fact is people are coming to us all the time with all kinds of issues. I used to find jobs for kids And then the parents came to me and said, hey, look, you got that job for my son or daughter at McDonald's, but you know what? I really needed that job. I had no idea that I was, bypassing the actual breadwinner to provide an opportunity to a young person, and there was a need in the home that I hadn't identified. So I think those things are all important, that people need their mental health services. They need to be able to speak to people that look like them and that can understand them, with whom they can relate. But at the same time, I think that people also need to recognize that we don't know the circumstances and situations people find themselves in.
Not at all.
And now, today more than ever, even if we could consider this a post-pandemic, which we're not, we still recognize that there's a lot of volatility in our community, a lot of divisiveness, a lot of mechanisms that don't provide adequate communication. So sensitivity, empathy, diversity, equity, inclusion are all components that are going to be helpful in kind of diminishing this violence that's in our community.
So we all need to work together
Yes.
on and take up the stigma and the taboo of mental illness. More people are talking about it now, but before it's been so ingrained, and I'm going to say especially in the African American community,
Oh, absolutely.
about that you don't have mental issues. Just drink, and I've heard this before. Drink some water, pray about it. But that's not going to solve the problem.
No,
It's still there. You
no.
cannot overlook it.
No, and you're right. Our community has been particularly, I'm not going to say more adversely impacted, but our lack of being open about the things that we're confronted with don't make it better. I was just sharing with someone just the other day, I said, it's important that people take their medication. It's important that people ask for help. And it's important that people receive help. But at the end of the day, I think that we can't just make this about prescribing medications. I think there's a level of treatment and efficacy that can be found in conversations, whether it's with your grandmother, your auntie, your uncle, someone in whom you can have confidence and trust. And that's not to diminish the value of a licensed mental health therapist. Whatever it is that you need, you've got to find the right relationship that allows that conduit to be open so that the door for communication can be positively open, and then provide the efficacy that's necessary to deliver the outcome that we think is going to be beneficial to the individual and ultimately the community.
Like you said, we're running out of time here. We don't have all the answers, but we are working on little by little piecing things together as a community and trying to reach out for our kids.
Sure.
So you hit on some very great things, Dr. Richardson. I really appreciated the opportunities that you are affording a lot of children in this community through your STEAM program, whether it's at the lab or whether it is at a jazz camp. But you're right, we've got to be able to expose our children to so much more, because if they see nothing but violence, they think it's normal. If they see nothing but poverty around them, that's normal life to them. They've got to be able to see that there's something different, and they don't have to always pick up a gun. They don't have to pick up a gun, period. That they can talk things out.
Sure.
They can be mature. They can go into a lab and make something to calm them down, or just something, expose them to something that's going to change their life, and break those generational curses. I call them generational curses
You're
that are passed on
absolutely
from each generation to each generation to each generation. All right, we're out of time here, but we're going to be back next week. Dr. Richardson, again, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having
I
me.
so appreciate you. Love
you.
you.
Appreciate
Now, next week we're going to have a local DJ who spent some time in prison himself for some things that he did in his childhood, and now how he has turned his life around and mentoring other people. And we have Dr. Reginald Crenshaw, who was actually supposed to be on today, but had to reschedule last minute because of a meeting. He's going to be on talking about the different things that the school system is doing to fight the violence that we're now seeing largely in a lot of schools too, and what the school system has put in place to do something different when school's only 3 weeks away. Can't believe it.
Who's the DJ you have coming?
DJ Watsky,
DJ Rodsky has brought a bunch of kids up to the lab over the years.
he's amazing.
Back even when he was at the Dearborn Y, and all the things he's doing now with MOB Fest and et cetera. Yeah.
Very involved in the community, very determined to make a difference.
Yes, he is. He's a warrior.
All right, we'll see you next week. Thanks for joining us.